Today we're going to be taking a look at these obnoxiously yellow fungi, which are edible mushrooms known as Suillus americanus. If Latin isn't your thing, a common name is the chicken fat mushroom. It's a little grosser than calling them white pine boletes, but after seeing the globby yellow caps, it makes sense. The yellow cranks up even more when you catch them in the golden hour. There's probably a fairy tale involving a ring of mushrooms in eerie golden light, so maybe I should be careful. But anyways, you can expect to find the chicken fat mushroom throughout the summer and fall, scattered around eastern white pines. Sometimes they'll be right up near the base of the trees, and other times they'll be way over in the lawn. They can fruit in huge numbers too, which is always a nice thing to help you fill your mushroom basket. These mushrooms are mycorrhizal, living off of sugars produced by the trees, helping the trees obtain the nutrients and water that they need. The more I've been getting into mushrooms, the more I've grown to appreciate pines, since they support so many different ectomycorrhizal mushrooms. This little stand hasn't disappointed me, pumping out several different mushroom species this year. So let's get into identification. These mushrooms are a good representation of Suillus mushrooms, having a lot of the features that typically characterize mushrooms in the genus. First off, let's look at that slimy cap. When they first emerge, the caps are covered in a thick, boogery slime. Sometimes you'll see this on mature caps too, as long as it's not too dry out. Suillus species with slimy caps are often best when peeled, in order to avoid some digestion issues. If you plan on eating these, I would highly recommend doing that. If you can, try to find some older mushrooms too. One thing I've noticed on the older mushrooms are these little pinkish red patches. They kind of look like places where the caps might have been scratched or bruised. Flip some over to make sure that the mushrooms have pores and not gills. The pores should be yellow to yellowish brown. If you have a hand lens or a magnifying glass, you should also be able to tell that they're quite angular rather than round. Looking at the edge of the caps, you might notice some scraps of reddish-brown fibrous tissue. These are remnants of the partial veil that may or may not be present. The same thing goes for rings on the stem. Many mushrooms won't have these, while some will. You're more likely to find these bits hanging on the younger mushrooms. As they get older, get rained on, or beat up, the remnants tend to disappear. One of the most important characteristics is going to be on the stem. These mushrooms have unique, splotchy, mottled colored stems, with the odd dark speckle. The presence or absence of these dark spots, or glandular dots, is often a key identifying characteristic for Suillus mushrooms. Notice that on this mushroom, these glandular dots go all the way up to the pore surface. One last thing you could do is look at the flesh. These mushrooms have a nice yellow flesh to match everything else. It'll quickly bruise to a slightly reddish color after being cut though. So for those of you watching with your own questionable mushrooms, if all of those things check out, you probably have Suillus americanus. Now, just a few warnings. Apparently these mushrooms can cause contact dermatitis in some people. I haven't had that experience, but they have left a sticky brown residue on my hands that I promptly wash off after harvesting and processing. Like I said before, peeling the caps is also advised to avoid any gastrointestinal issues you might have. Like a lot of other mushrooms in the Suillus family, they get pretty buggy quick too, so you really only want to eat them when they're in their prime. And since they're so mediocre, it's really not worth stretching their best by date and going for the old ones. While there may not be any poisonous lookalikes that are really difficult to tell apart, I figured I would throw in a warning anyways, since nearby there were some of these little guys coming up. These are Amanita mushrooms. Probably Amanita flavoconea, or maybe even Amanita muscaria, but the speckles look a little bit too yellow. Either way, both are poisonous mushrooms that you would not want to eat. Compared to the slimy yellow buttons of Suillus americanus, you should be able to see the difference, but I could see how one might end up in the basket. To keep that from happening, make sure your mushrooms have pores and no bulb-like vulva underground. So there you have it. That's the chicken fat mushroom. Be safe and happy hunting. Bye.